presenter, my colleague, Kerstin Sommer. Kerstin, of course, is the manager of the Participatory Slum Upgrading Programme, one of our largest and most impactful programs in UN Habitat. And she can give us a bit of a zoomed out view, Kerstin, of how you see this crisis unfolding and its link, its relationship with urban-rural linkages. Kerstin, the floor is yours. We can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Shibra. I'm starting the presentation is still uploading, but anyway, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm speaking both in the function of being part of the task force of UN Habitat related to the COVID-19 with the emergency response and the Participatory Slum Upgrading Programme that we're implementing in partnership with the ACP Secretariat, African, Caribbean, Pacific countries, and financed by the European Commission. So yes, we have heard about already the vulnerabilities, and I'm very pleased to say that UN Habitat played an important role in defining the UN framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to COVID-19. And we have there two pillars that are particularly relevant for the discussion today. One is on the pillar 5 on community resilience and social cohesion. And then there's also the third pillar on basic services and social protection. And very important, this framework also makes reference to the urban-rural linkages, both with the perspective of the risk of spreading the virus, and also the mitigation of the same and the controlled migration and movement, but also from an action point of view, how one can really link the support networks and frameworks and actions with a community-driven lens to increasing the resilience of communities. I'm not sure if one can actually see my screen.
Yeah, can you go to the presentation mode? Can you click on the presentation mode? Maybe that's part of the challenge on your within PowerPoint.
It seems that it's still loading, it says so. Anyway, let me continue just like that.
Please.
We all know the slums have several vulnerabilities, and already related to the slum deprivation, also where we look at housing, water, sanitation, tenure security, and the overcrowding at household level, but also at neighborhood level. But with the urban-rural linkages and also the COVID-19 challenge, we really see an increased vulnerability, and much has to do with the questions around affordability. And here we see that rural areas become again a pull factor to informal settlements and people that live in poverty and, as we heard, inequalities, because from health services to food access to also water, sanitation, everything is more affordable in rural areas. And also we know the urban society is cash-based. And as we hear, people are losing income, livelihoods are becoming unstable. So with that, rural areas become attractive. And at the same time, we also learned from Ebola that actually more people were affected by the impacts of measures taken and poverty-related impacts there than actually the disease itself. And we also learned the importance of having a very careful look at connections between rural and urban areas. And we learned the danger of mitigating disease when one doesn't take into consideration the movement of people, the needs of people. So one area is very important to the response planning, that we look at the people's needs and also at those linkages and see how we can support those networks and also assess the feasibility of certain, for example, Shipra already mentioned in the beginning, the most obvious also is the food security, the food supply chain, but also looking at support socioeconomic safety nets, I mean, also financial exchange, support between family members. And one has to also mention, even though it's often very uncomfortable, but also should people pass away, we have cultural considerations that are also very important. And informal settlements are often seen as city, urban, and very central locations, but also when we look at integrating in urban responses, we know that informal settlements are not aligned with the administrative borders of cities. They also sit in peri-urban areas, and they do have, the more we, I mean, already the informal settlements at the center have quite often rural characteristics and cultures. We see farming, we see pigs, we see animals that are very much also there as, let's say, a backup for the livelihoods and the household income. But the more we go outside, the more actually we have still the rural culture. And this one is also a very important one to take into consideration. So in our response planning, we've put a lot of effort in putting guidelines together and implementation tools that really are with an integrative perspective. So both with a territorial, the governance level, but also the sectorial issues, the different themes from water, sanitation, food security, mobility. It's really a very complex issue, and we really advocate for governments to align national responses and national measures in line with those needs at community level. So we want both. I mean, we heard already the criticism of a top-down approach. We believe it's important to have a top-down approach that is informed by the bottom, and that is really people-centered, and at the same time also a planning with the people, so an integrated, inclusive community response plan that is framed by local authorities, response plans, since they are at the forefront coordinating, and really a two-way communication also between people and governments. And we know one approach fits all doesn't work, so that we have also the necessary flexibility and adaptability. We already heard about the inequality, so an equitable approach to really provide the right support to keep up the coping mechanism of communities, including also resources, is very key. And talking about that, we have looked at several case studies, so we really welcome the approach from Costa Rica with the national guidelines that give really orientation for local authorities, but also for community engagement, where we have this territorial approach bringing into the service provision to informal settlements. We also saw a very good approach in pre-town, where we have the local adaptation at city level, where again urban farming and actions that cater for linking urban and rural areas is there. And with the UN Habitat approach, we've learned with our partners in this COVID-19 emergency and provided tools and guidelines in line with that. And one thing also looking forward, it's much actually about when we talk with partners and looking at the long-term recovery to learn from interventions from rural areas now, because we see that poverty is increasing in urban areas due to the COVID-19. So we're talking more about actually the conditions, the back to the community assets of rural areas that we need to leverage in the recovery. So here we are, for example, also in the context of Africa, promoting a challenge fund that has been applied by partners like ACF and also the Kenyan Climate Innovation Center in rural areas, but actually no partner has yet applied this in the urban context. So this becomes a very important also resource to bring private sector, other financing mechanisms into the urban context, and then again bring informal settlements also into the investment perspective for the private sector, since the rural private sector is comfortable already, but hasn't applied the same in the more complex areas. And we feel with the COVID-19 and also the need to organize people, really show the importance of a peoples-based approach, because only with people you can change behavior and actually show an adequate response to this. We can leverage this mobilization to also build partnerships for the long-term recovery. So it's about balancing the needs of the people in the urban settings, ideally keeping them there, but then also providing the perspective, the long-term perspective of change, and leveraging the urban-rural linkages in the best way possible in the way forward. So I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Kerstin. That's really very, very important, the last bits that you were saying. One, the long-term perspective, keeping the long-term perspective in mind, and also learning from interventions that have worked in rural areas, and how we've looked at leveraging assets in rural areas, and can we do this similar, can we undertake similar efforts in urban areas? So very, very interesting indeed. And thank you for the great work that you're doing, especially with the COVID response measures. I see there are some questions to you in the chat, and we'll come to those as well after. So thanks again.